Thank you all for coming today. I'd like to make this as beneficial to all of you as possible. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please just raise your hand and let it be known so I can answer questions as they arise up on the screen. I work for NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and I've been doing it since 1997. So I go to different countries and do assignments that document programs that these organizations are doing. A lot of it's refugee related or microcredit, things like that. Today's slideshow, I'm going to show three different bodies of work. There's three chapters. The first chapter is a portfolio I had done years ago. The second chapter is specific little things that have specific problems that are in different countries and the way I've approached that. And then the third section is Black Apple, just images from the book. And thanks. Before I show you the second slide, many years ago, probably 1998 or 99, I was in Azerbaijan, and I was in an area called the Winter Ground. It's where all the herders come down out of the mountains into this area during the winter, and they let their animals graze there. And the year that they had come down, Armenia had moved their border over the mountain, and they weren't able to go back up. So they lived in this area. They were sort of stuck in this area called the Winter Ground. So they were literally, some folks were living in holes in the ground. And I started thinking conceptually about this being stuck and not able to go back and kind of suspended between two different places. So I used the word Winter Ground to describe this portfolio I made, which I'm about to show you, which is just about kind of being in between, I guess is the best way to describe it. And I edited it based on color, so it sort of goes through a spectrum of color. And most of the images, the vast majority, were made between assignments on layovers in different airports or different countries and things like that. And I'm always going to ask, does anybody have any questions so far? All right. I started it out with a picture of a field in Minnesota. This is a prayer time in India on the Ganges. This portfolio was all shot on Fuji Provia 100F film, and I used a Tiffin 812 filter. I've spoken at B&H enough to know that that's sort of important information. This is a Ferris wheel. I love going to carnivals in Maine. For many years I lived in Maine. This is New York City. This is a AIDS clinic in Uganda, and I was to photograph this gentleman, and I sat down and I started taking some photographs of him, and he put on his coat to leave, and it was the first time he was going home in 3 months. So I photographed him leaving, and then we went over to where he lived. I had an assignment in Alaska on Native American self-governance, and I was stuck for a few days in Bethel, Alaska. This is in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. This is a house blessing. And I like to photograph with mixed light sources, where you have one light source and then the candles illuminating their faces. We photographed this in the morning, and the priest, the Orthodox priest, was really excited to drink afterwards, and we all had a little housewarming party that lasted for a long time. But this is that same being stuck in Bethel, Alaska. One of the, as you'll see in the next chapter of this slideshow, I started out by living with a group of Roma in Bulgaria, and this is from that experience. This is a man and his wife. She's 14. And this is a train in Indonesia, just outside of Jakarta. This is a bar restaurant in Niger, in Niamey, Niger. The color is much more vivid up here.
Yeah,
I think it's flared. This is a gas station in Florida. I was riding the bus in Kenya, and everybody got off at a rest stop, and I photographed this guy here. Does anybody have any questions? This is the largest slideshow I've ever done in terms of the amount of slides, so I'm kind of cruising through. Yep, you had a question?
Available light?
Everything's available light. The vast majority of it was shot with a 35 millimeter lens, handheld. I think there's only a couple images where I used a tripod, and I'll tell you if I did. Yep.
I noticed you use a lot of vignetting.
Yeah, that's natural. It's just the way the lens does it.
Okay, so that wasn't done in the print, or it wasn't done after you digitized, I guess.
Yeah, the question was, did I use a lot of vignetting? And it was just natural. The vignetting was natural. It was just happened that way. On these images that I'm showing now, the only instructions that I gave to the printer was to match the chrome. So they match the chrome. There's no Photoshop that's been done to it other than just tweaking it a little lighter and darker. Good question. Any other questions? All right. Oh, I didn't explain this image. This is a refugee camp in Uganda. It's actually an IDP camp, an internally displaced persons camp. So they have the same protection as people who have crossed an international border with a well-founded fear for their life, but they're still in their own country. That means that if there's a war up north and they move down south, they still have UN refugee protection rights. So this was a camp that was being made at an old deserted factory. And I was there when the refugees were arriving. What was the question?
These are all shot in film?
Yes, the question was, were these all shot in film? And yes, they were. They were all shot in Provia 100 film.
Well, why was it because there wasn't digital at that time? Or is it because of some other reason that you just did film?
The reason I shot it on film was because it was before digital. Before digital had become. These were all shot in the 90s, and then probably up to 2003. Yeah. This is a Roma camp in Velengrad, Bulgaria. This is where I lived for a number of weeks. This is Dhaka in Bangladesh on Thanksgiving Day. I was there for an assignment doing a assessment of stateless people. I did a global assessment of statelessness for an organization called Refugees International. And it was a non-photographic assignment. And I happened to be doing this stateless assessment in Bangladesh, and I took the afternoon on Thanksgiving to walk around the streets and make some pictures. Yep.
And did you envision this body of work as telling a story as opposed to each individual picture telling a story?
The question was, did I envision this body of work as telling a whole, as a complete, or just individual images? The answer is, I started out doing individual images, and then I started to see how they work together, and then I bounced off of that. And that's a really great technique for finding your own voice, is to make some images, take your favorite images, and just make little prints and put them on the wall, and then start to see which ones you keep up there and how they work together, and then you start to find your own voice coming through. It's a really great technique. This is in Moscow. I was on an assignment in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, and I was living in Tajikistan, in Dushanbe, Tajikistan at the time. So to get from Ulaanbaatar to Tajikistan, which are not very big hubs, I had to spend 4 days processing my film in Moscow. And I was also very, very sick. I had a flu. So what I did was I slept in my hotel room and drank NyQuil and orange juice. And this is literally me coming back from the pharmacy buying some NyQuil in Moscow. I love Russia, and I love the former Soviet Union. It's a place I really relate to.
That's you?
No, that's a guy on a bridge.
Oh, I think
This is me taking the picture, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. These are a couple kids flying kites on the Ganges in India. One thing I like to do is I like to photograph the view from my hotel room wherever I am. And this is Dhaka again in Bangladesh. This is a rainstorm in northern Uganda on a safari I was on. And all the panoramic pictures I made with an X-Pan camera on film. And none of the photographs you see here today have been cropped that I know of. If they have been, I'll let you know. This is in Niger. These are some nomads, and they just have everything underneath the sun. They're just out there. On the UN Development Index, Niger or Mali are both at the bottom of all the countries in terms of health, education, social benefits, and all of that. And I was there for a drought, and I'll talk a little bit more about that drought later. This is a boxing gym in Uganda. And this woman. She worked there. She'd clean up after the boxers and mop up the floors and prepare the food and things like that. This is in India, and I photographed it at about 4 in the morning. This was on a tripod. I was waiting for the sun to rise, and I just sat there with my camera and framed it up, and then made some exposures every 10 or 15 minutes. And as the light came up, everything got blue, and then probably half an hour after this, it was all washed out. I call it the blue 60. It's just like that 60 minutes. Does anybody have any other questions? Any questions? Yeah?
What was the filter you mentioned before that you used?
What was the filter I used? It's called a Tiffin 812, like the number 812, and it's like a warming filter. It's like an 81 or an 81A with more like an 81 with a little bit of magenta in it. It's an enhancing filter. I don't use them anymore because of the digital. You just tweak your color temperature a little and get the same effect. Now I still shoot film, black and white film, and then for clients I shoot digitally. This is a Carnival Cruise Line, and this is early morning, a woman playing miniature golf. And as I was making the photograph, I was sort of thinking about that big cross there, and how the light kind of goes up to the sky and how she's illuminated. It's funny how sort of these things kind of arise. And then this is that same boxing gym in Uganda, where a guy's just resting between exercises. This is in northern Niger, in Agadez, which is this town with an old mosque in the background. And my technique was I just hold the camera up to my face, and then I let people walk through the frame, and then I just go snap, snap, snap as they're walking through the frame rather than chasing them around. And I think we'll have enough time, and I'll tell you how I approach people if you're interested in how I work with them. That's usually like the big question. Yeah.
What lens did you use?
35 millimeter lens. These are some indigenous houses in Niger. Little tent structures. This is in Palestine. I was there during an intifada. This is a woman rocking her baby during some shelling. This is Tajikistan. I lived there for a year, and Tajikistan is an extremely mountainous area, and this is a little valley. And I had rode up this mountain in this little hired car, some friends and I, or some colleagues and I, and we stopped and we knocked on a house of a stone in the door of a stone house, and they let us stay with them. And all these kids started arriving, and I had asked who these kids were, because I didn't see any other houses. And they said they were their kids. They had 16 children. Yeah, 16. And there's no real farmland. This is about it. You just see, it's just rock. Everywhere's just rock. And then there'll be like a little tomato plant kind of that has made its way through. The market had just a few eggs and some cooking oil and some Snickers bars, and that was it. Snickers bars. Yeah.
May I ask what you do there for a year?
What did I do in Tajikistan for a year? Well, my wife got a job in Tajikistan, and so I went there with her, because I didn't want to be apart from her for a year.
What did she do?
What's that?
What did she do?
My wife worked for an international humanitarian aid organization. She ran a civil society program. Yeah, we're no longer married.
Okay.
So when I talk about my fiance later, I didn't want to confuse you. This is in Casablanca, in Morocco. I had an 18-hour layover, so I went walking around on the beach.
Where are you standing to get that done?
I'm standing on the road and just sort of looking down,
That's great.
kind of like on a seawall. Any other questions? Yeah.
How much of your work has been self-assigned? Like you've gone out and just
Uh-huh.
for taking photos and you haven't been employed by an NGO or
Yeah.
something?
The question is, how much of my work has been self-assigned? Very, very little of it, because I can't really afford to go to these places on my own, on speculation. The last 6 or 7 years, with digital photography becoming very prominent, what I've been doing is I've been teaching workshops, and that's about 40% of my income now, and then 60% is assignment work or selling books or other things.
Do you ever find it limiting that you can't really take the pictures you want to take because you're in these places and you kind of have an agenda to take
Yeah.
somebody else's work?
That's a really good question. The question was, do I find it limiting to take the photographs that the NGO wants versus the ones that I want? And I've been able to maintain my relationship with my clients because I do take the photographs that they want. They're my client. And that's really the long and the short of it. I can't tell you how many times I've driven by some incredibly spectacular vistas, and I've stopped and took just a couple pictures, but haven't really spent the time there that I wanted to, because I had to get somewhere to photograph a meeting or an inoculation or a water sanitation program. But the longer I work with my clients, the more they realize that a picture of a cement cylinder full of clean water isn't nearly as exciting as a beautiful vista that shows people herding camels or something like that. But that's a really good question, and the important thing there is a lot of people who want to get started in NGO photography say, they say, well, I want to do it for free. I'll do it for free. I'll get my own airplane ticket and I'll go there. If they can get me access to a refugee camp or something like that, I'll do it. And then I can use the pictures and they can use the pictures. But the problem is that the photographer and the NGO have different agendas. So it's not a really good relationship. And if the NGO isn't paying you, then they don't have that much of a vested interest. Even if, when I was first getting started, one NGO wanted me to go at cost for them, and I said I'd do it for $200. So just because that $200, was sort of a symbolic gesture that they were paying me. Yeah. Yeah.
Who owns the pictures after you take them?
Who owns the pictures
You own
after
them?
I take them? Well, that's an agreement between the photographer and the client, and their day rate is based on usage. If they buy it outright versus if they just want to use it for 5 years or something like that. So That's legal stuff. And it's been my experience that we've sometimes talked a lot about that legal stuff online. What I, hear, and what I do is I tend to be pretty lenient with my usage rights, just because if I'm lenient with them, they're often lenient with me for using them for other things and exhibitions and things like that. And it's a great way to build a rapport with your client. But I'm not so lenient that I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. And it's something you sort of have to sort out for yourself.
Question?
Yeah.
You do a lot of traveling. You said that film-wise you use black and white, digital. What type of equipment do you travel with normally?
What sort of equipment do I travel with? Well, when I shoot black and white, I shoot with Leica M6 cameras, and a Hasselblad X-Pan, and a Nikonis 5, like a little waterproof Nikon camera. Digitally, I shoot with a Leica M9 and Canon 5D Mark II, I guess I'm at. And but I much prefer the Leica. Much prefer. I use only prime lenses. I don't use any zoom lenses. So my camera bag is this big, and it's got, my Canon camera bag, my big camera bag is this big, and it's got a camera body, an 85, a 50, and a 28, and that's it. And then I just switch lenses. 28 millimeter.
You don't use anything wider for landscapes or anything?
No, it gets weird, I just don't want it to get weird, like people with elongated. I'm going to loosen up. Yeah, I don't want it to get weird, And fixed lenses are sharper, cheaper, faster, and also you compose better. When I teach workshops, I always encourage people to use fixed focus lenses or set their lens to a certain 50 millimeter or 35 millimeter, and use their feet to go back and forth because it forces you to compose differently.
How about a close-up lens? Do you use a close-up?
Do I use a close-up lens? No. I have a 100 millimeter that does macro, but I never use it. I mean, I have a lot of lenses, but I don't use them. I just don't use them. It's real. I can't tell you how important it is just to be mobile, to be able to move around, rather than, having this huge bag with all this gear and trying to figure out, should I use my 50 or should I use my 35? And you're fumbling around with all these other things, and life is just sort of unfolding before you in this really beautiful way, and you're trying to decide between a 35 and a 50. That's not how I roll. I just if the 35's on there, I'm going to take a few steps forward. If the 50's on there, I'll take a few steps back. Yep.
So if you wanted to pick one lens just for fairly casual travel photography for a fixed length, what would you say?
If I could only have one lens for photography, I would use the 35. Yep.
But you don't take the 35?
I do with my Leica. With my Canons, I have a 28, a 50, and an 85. With my Leica, I have a 28, a 35, two 40 millimeter lenses, and a 50.
So on a crop, you would take like a 28, or
On a crop?
well, if you have like the crop sensor or this
Oh, the question was, is the 28 a 28 on my Leica? And it is, because I have the M9, it's a full sensor. Yeah. Yep.
Do you find yourself missing shots if you have the 5D Mark II or something and it's so much bigger and people are a little more intimidated, or they think it's more expensive to fit in?
The question is, am I intimidating with my 5D versus the Leica?
Yeah, or do you find yourself getting shots?
Yeah. The Leica it's a small camera. You go in there, it's easy to focus. You're never questioning your focus. It's sharp, it's contrasty, it's noisy. It's really noisy. But as you'll see, as I kind of mature as a photographer, I like my pictures to be a little grittier, I like my photographs to look photographic, I mean, we're all so concerned with, resolution and all that, and I just want my photographs to sort of string an emotional chord with the audience. All right. This is a barber on the Ganges. This is in Azerbaijan, the oil fields. This is in Arizona, a gas station, during a rainstorm. This is in Eritrea. It's a little country that used to be part of Ethiopia. And this was at lunch on an assignment. I wandered into a different section of where we were having lunch, where they were playing billiards. This is that same factory where the refugee camp was being started in Uganda, northern Uganda.
Film, how did you get it processed?
When I was shooting film, how did I get it processed? I would bring it back to the United States, and what I would do is I'd log all my film, and then all the even numbers I'd get processed. I processed like 5 of the even numbers, and then the odd number rolls I would process, so I don't throw them all into the lab at the same time. When I lived in Tajikistan, I'd get my film processed in Moscow. They have a Moscow Studios. It's like the Hollywood of Moscow, of Russia, and they would process my film there, and then I'd have to sneak it out. This is like in 1999. So I'd have all the film not cut, and then I'd roll it up and put it in the bottom of my camera bag, and I'd put my cameras on top of it, and I'd carry it with me. And then when I got to Tajikistan, I had means of bribing or greasing the wheels so that the film could get sent to clients that way. Yeah.
Since we're on this topic of your process,
Yeah.
what's your color correction process? Do you take time to? Do you have an assistant or something?
What is my color correction process?
Obviously, you scan the
These were scanned and done professionally for an exhibit in a book. When I shoot for clients, I usually give them about anywhere from 700 to 1,200 images for a 2-week period. If I do more images than that, they're kind of just like, what? We don't really need this many. What are we going to do with them? I try not to give them like 30 versions of the same thing. I'll give maybe 4 or 5 versions. And then I process them. I prefer Bridge over Lightroom because the way I have everything configured, Lightroom backs it up on a hard drive, and then your thumbnails, everything can get kind of split up. With Bridge, everything's right there. And then I have my backup hard drives, and everything's solid. So I don't have any of my images stored on my laptop. I have 2 external hard drives, and then I put one in my camera bag and one in another bag in case one of the bags gets nabbed. And then when I'm in the field, I'll be in the capital city, and then I'll be in a satellite office. I'll leave a disk of the images with that satellite office from that area, so I'm covered there. And when I have internet, depending on the client, I can upload to their library, and they have them almost in real time. Or not in real time, but 24 hours after I have them done.
Do you actually color correct the stuff you'll use for books or for your portfolio? Or?
I have it done professionally. Yeah. That's a whole nother thing. The question was, for books and things like that, do I do my own color correction? I don't. This is a sari making factory in India.
And we're all still on film here, right?
All these photographs are still on film. Yeah, all the photographs in this portfolio are on film. These are some guys eating lunch at a diner or at a school in Georgia, Soviet Republic of Georgia. What was funny was I was sent by the NGO to photograph this school that had been built. The school had not yet been built. So I got there, and everybody's sort of scrambling around, and there was this old man who was really kind of hunched over, and I helped him along, and we went upstairs, and these guys were having lunch, and I was photographing them, and then I asked the old man what he wanted, what was going on, and he said he was the security guard, and he was stopping me from photographing. I didn't even realize it. I was like, oh, I'm sorry. He's like, it's all right, you're fine, don't worry about it. This is a fair in Maine. This is Old Orchard Beach in Maine. Up until October, I had a home in Maine. I'm like the poster boy I love Maine. Maine's great. So, did you have a question?
When you're in some of these countries, how do you deal with the language issue?
When I'm in some of these countries, how do I deal with the language issue? Well, when I'm in Maine, I speak Mainer. I speak Russian. So when I'm in the former Soviet Union, I use my Russian. And when I'm, the clients provide somebody for me. But a lot of times, language sort of is irrelevant. When I teach workshops, I can get interpreters for people, but usually by the end of the first day, they're kind of like, this person's kind of getting in the way. I just want to photograph. And I really can't emphasize enough that when I photograph people, it's about my experience with the camera when I'm actually photographing and everything that's going on inside the frame. And then I'll put the camera aside and then I'll interact. I'll kick a soccer ball around or play some cards or talk about life or something like that. But doing both just doesn't work. I'll talk about that more later. This is India. See, the color is much richer here. We're all going to have twisted necks. This is a circus in Maine. They let me go backstage. Another carnival in Maine. As you can see, this is a beach in Maine. As you can see, I photograph every day, everywhere. So it doesn't matter to me if it's in Maine or if it's in Uganda or if it's in Iceland or anywhere. This is Uganda. This is this is where people get their clean water. And I'd go there in the morning and I'd hear what people had to say about the war that was going on and where different people were and stuff like that. Sort of my morning news. I've been to Uganda, I think like 15 or 16 times. This is in India. This is a dust storm in a little village in Niger. This is people praying and getting ready to go into the water in Varanasi in India. A boy in the back of a classroom in Uganda. This is Katrina, a bridge that didn't make it. One of the things I try to photograph is home. I have these ideas about what I'm trying to photograph. And what is home to people is something that I often photograph. It could be a suitcase. It could be an old factory that's housing refugees. It could be a refugee tent. In this case, it's a car that's been made into a bedroom, and this is in the Roma neighborhood in Sofia called Facultet. This is a man praying in the water in India. Yep.
Question. So, it's kind of astonishing that there's only one person there.
How did I get a photograph with only one person and have it be made in India?
Yeah.
I get up really early. I'll get up at 3, 4 in the morning when the light is good, and then I'll sleep. I go to bed at like 7 in the morning and get up around noon. And, I just got to get up or stay up late or do whatever it takes.
What time of day is this?
It's probably like 5, 4. What time of day was this photograph made? Probably about 4 or 5 in the morning. It's funny though, because at 4 or 5 in the morning, they're doing the laundry from the hotels, and you can kind of see your laundry being done in the Ganges, for what it's worth. This is a family in Niger. This is in Azerbaijan, Soviet art made out of cement. This is in Aztec, New Mexico. It's a gas station. And the guy in the picture, I don't know if you can see him, he's by the pickup truck. He lived there with his girlfriend, his wife, and they had a little baby. Yep.
You entitled this Winter Ground.
Mm-hmm.
What made you pick, for example, this image to
Mhm.
be included in that area? And that's sort of in that theme. How did you look at this image, you know, as an example, to fit the theme?
Mm-hmm. How does this image fit into the theme of Winter Ground? Well, it's interesting. It's a solitary figure, kind of stuck in between in life. It's at dusk. It's on the edge of the day, and also I think it fit well with the previous image, which has actually quite a bit of pink in it, and then this image, and it's sort of on the continuum. Yeah. You have to, when you edit and sequence, and I love to edit and sequence. That's something I really, really adore doing. You just have to take everything into account and play jazz. You know, you don't follow specific rules. That was a really good question. I appreciate that. This is an airport in Africa. Some luggage carts that are empty. This is a showers in that gym in Kampala in Uganda. This is a little girl on a train that has been abandoned and is now a home for refugees in Azerbaijan. And this is actually in the Winter Ground area of Azerbaijan. This little girl's name is Sofa. She's an orphan in Georgia. And I photographed her and I asked her, I said, do you ever want to go home? Do you go home? And she said, this is my home. This is where my friends are and this is where my family is. And when I photograph out in the field and I go back and talk to the country director, I sort of debrief them on what I found, like a school that hadn't yet been built or a well that needed repair or something like that. And I told her about SOFA, and I said, that's a really good success indicator, because in development work, it's kind of hard to figure out what's successful and what's not. And the fact that this person thought that this orphanage was her home is a real good success indicator. This is some light bouncing around in American Southwest. These are some IDPs, internally displaced people in Abkhazia in Georgia. It's a little breakaway region. This is a gas station in Africa. This is Buzkashi, it's dead goat polo, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. This is a bus station in Eritrea. One thing I do is I have this list of places that I go to if I have extra time. So I arrived at this town a little bit early, and I thought, I just took this list out of my back pocket, out of my wallet, and I sort of, well, what sort of ideas can I have? Where can I go to make photographs? And one of them was the bus station, just to keep me moving and keep shooting. The reason I love to photograph at bus stations is because everybody's involved in solving problems. They're all like coming together to try and figure out how to get all of this onto that bus, and the people too. And I love photographing processes. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Do you find it's difficult to not get people to stare at you in those situations where you're barely standing out? Do you have a big expensive camera?
The question is it difficult not to get people to stare at me with my big expensive camera? It's not difficult. I'm going to talk about that. You know what I'll do? Is no matter what, at 2:30, we'll just talk about approaching people. I'll just turn off the projector, because I think that's what people want to learn, right? Yeah, because I'm here for you guys. All right, okay. This is Afghanistan. It's just Afghanistan, northern Afghanistan. This was made before 9/11. This was made in 2001, in June 2001. This is a bagel factory in Mongolia. They have this bread that is it's just a boiled ring of dough that's baked, so it's a bagel. Yeah.
Are you using a tripod for this?
Am I using a tripod for this? I wasn't. I was using the corner of a truck. But again, this was shot probably 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. And on this trip to Mongolia, it was so cold. I mean, it was like 50 below zero some nights. It was really cold. So what was really precarious was condensation on my cameras, changing between temperatures, making sure the film didn't freeze and crack. So I'd put the camera into my parka and then pull it out and take a picture and then put it back. That sort of thing. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about specific places. That's the end of my winter ground portfolio. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, thanks. I wasn't. Thank you. This is June 11th, 1983. It's my 12th birthday. So if you want to do the math, I turned 41 yesterday. And this is me receiving my first camera. And this is pretty much the most important moment of my life. And it was recorded by my stepmom. She had a camera and she took the picture. And photography is important for so many reasons. And sometimes we're all so encompassed by, we're so involved in the equipment or trying to show off that we forget that photographs are just real nice pieces of life. And you know, I'm really grateful that this really important part of my life was recorded. And a lot of times workshop students I have say, well, I'm going to shoot weddings on the side, you know, to make money. And I think that wedding photographs have a much longer shelf life than any photograph that I've made. A lot of times when I travel, some of the first things that people show me are their photo albums, certainly in India and Darjeeling. And this is just a nice little reminder to everyone that, you know, photography, it's got a lot of different purposes. This is from my first photo project when I was 12. I photographed the circus, and I asked my father to drop me off at the circus to photograph, and I got him up really early, and he dropped me off when they were raising the tent. And I spent the entire day there all the way through the performance, and I was able to photograph every little bit of the, and it was my first real photo project. And it was like photography was so fresh and great and new, and you had that little roll of film with 36 chances in it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I still shoot black and white film is I like having just that little roll of film, you know, and the 36 chances.
Pictures you took that day?
Do I know how many pictures I took that day? I think I took almost 4 rolls, you know. And some of the images that you saw in the winter ground portfolio, I probably spent 10 rolls to get one image, you know. It's funny. Yeah. Yeah, they let me go out back with the clowns. And then after college, I got a job with a still life studio, and we photographed collectible dolls on 8x10 cameras, and we'd have faxes, conference calls, meetings, FedExes about whether the doll's head should be like this or like this or this. And I was drinking, I haven't had coffee in 15 years probably, but I was drinking a lot of coffee and I was just bouncing off the walls. But what I did was I saved up money from working for that studio to go and do my first photo project, which was in Bulgaria. This is in the Rhodope Mountains of Bulgaria, and I lived with this group of Muslims who weren't allowed to go back. They were traditionally from Turkey, but they weren't allowed to go back to Turkey. Turkey closed off the border, so they were sort of stuck in between. And I lived up in the mountains with them. And this little girl, Rumyana, what I did was I had this little piece of paper that had the name and address of a family. And I got on the bus in Sofia, in the capital city, and I got off in this town called Satovcha. And I thought I was where I was going because I didn't know the Cyrillic alphabet. And they said, no. There's another bus that goes to Ribnova, which is this town. And that only leaves twice a week. And I hit it the right day. So I rode that bus to the end. And I was way down in the, on the Greek border in the southern part of Bulgaria, and this little girl said that that was her family. And she showed me around the village. And what she did was, just for that hour or so between when she knew that I was coming and her family was coming in from the fields, she showed me where brick makers were making bricks to build the mosque. So she was showing me people kind of stomping and pressing the mud to make bricks. And what occurred to me was that if this person that was showing me around was older, they would have showed me the mosque, not where they were making the bricks to build the mosque. And I started to think it's important to think like a kid, because children think visually rather than in terms of the context, the intellectual context of everything. So I think that it's important to think like a kid when you're photographing and just be playful and have a lot of fun.
What is it they're doing?
They're stringing up, what is it they're doing in the photograph? They're stringing up tobacco to dry, and they dry up the tobacco and it's sold to I think a Swiss tobacco company buys it. This is Roman and Dora Chilev. They're my Bulgarian gypsy parents, and I stayed in this gypsy village. And a lot of times people say you should not use the term gypsy; it's derogatory. You should use the word Roma. And Roman told me, he said, you should be proud to be a gypsy, and you're a gypsy now, Thatcher. And they brought me into their family, which involved a little bit of drinking. In fact, there's a bottle kind of hid behind him right there. But so I use the word gypsy. And it's really one of those wonderful experiences where you're brought into somebody's family. And that's one of the great things about the career I've chosen for myself, is I get to become part of these people's family. And this photograph is hanging in my home as a reminder of some of my roots, in a way. This boy has a disease called Lyme disease. And when I eventually moved to Bulgaria and photographed for a human rights organization called the Helsinki Committee on Human Rights, and I just photographed this guy who was in this town where the Bulgarians, the Roma, the gypsies weren't being paid by the Bulgarian government. And it had the highest percentage of gypsies in any town in Bulgaria. So there was like a hunger strike, a lot of things going on. And I stayed, once you're in the circuit, you get to stay with different families wherever you go. And I remember the day I photographed this, I slept on kind of a couch in a living room, and I got up in the morning and I walked across the carpet to go out to the outhouse, and the carpet crunched, and underneath the mud had frozen underneath the rug, and because the electricity and the heat had been turned off. It was so cold. And then I photographed in prisons. With the Helsinki Committee, we did a lot with human rights. So prisons, mental hospitals, orphanages, places like that. And we did a comparison of the Roma population versus the general population, and their conditions and their sentences they were handed versus each other. And we as a human rights worker, I would hand out the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for detainees. So prisoners in Bulgaria at that time had no idea that they had any rights. And one right you have as a prisoner under the UN is 1 hour of time outside, weather permitting, for exercise and to breathe and stuff like that. So we were able to get them to go outside and walk around in a circle in the yard. This prison is in Stara Zagora in Bulgaria. I got paid $70 a month. My rent was $25 a month. And I'd hitchhike around the country with my cameras and go, I had a letter from the government saying I could go in unannounced into any of these facilities. At that point, Bosnia was happening. And this is just outside the airport in Sarajevo. These are all explosions from mortar attacks. This photograph actually was was definitely off the first roll, if not the first picture I made when I got to Bosnia, and this was off the last roll. And all of those little pockmarks in the building, those are spray from machine guns. And these little kids were squatting, their family was squatting in here. And I don't know if you can see it, but on the edge there's some little yellow tape, and that's the UN put it there because of landmines. There's just landmines everywhere. This is in Tajikistan. This woman borrowed, this is an NGO photograph. This was an assignment for Mercy Corps, based out of Portland, Oregon. And this woman borrowed $500 and was able to double the size of her bakery. I photographed her. I put the camera on a tripod. I did put a camera on the tripod. And her daughter walked through the frame, and I asked her daughter to go back and stay there. I don't pose any of my photographs except for portraits, because it's obvious that the person is aware of the camera. And I was making the photograph, and then I thought that the light on her face was a little flat. So what I did was I closed the door and shaded the left side of her face, with the door being closed. And I learned that sort of trick from photographing the dolls back in Maine. It's kind of funny how worlds collide. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
It's a beautiful shot. Yeah, it's a good shot.
The comment was, it's a beautiful shot. Thank you very much. This is a little baby named Nazira. And the little baby died about 2 weeks after this photograph was made. A lot of times when we think of malnutrition and starvation and things like that, you think of large scale in Africa, but there's a lot of it going on in the Asian subcontinent, in Central Asia, and places like that. Not on the scale of Africa, but there really is, there's hardship that's lethal in a lot of places. This is dead goat Polo, and this is a photograph of a goat carcass being brought up and down a field, and then whoever brings the goat carcass around the goal gets points and things like that. And this is, I'm showing you this photograph because it's just following an event, which we often do as photographers, is just sort of follow the event. But what's really great is this is the same day. This was made probably within an hour of the other photograph. And this is just me playing around with light in between the horses. And I think that this photograph says a lot more about mood and the spirit of what Buzkashi is than this photograph. This is a story about a girl named Huyan. I think you two were asking about getting a whole story in and how to approach it. This girl, her father, this is in China, and her father died in a coal mining accident, and they lived in a rural province. So her mother, her brother, and her moved to Beijing. But because they were from a rural province, they weren't entitled to any of the social benefits of being in Beijing. Among the social benefits are school, so the kids couldn't go to school. So her mother moved to a neighborhood where an NGO put up a school for migrant laborers. So Huyan's able to go to school. Huyan's mother was only able to find a job on the other side of Beijing. And if you're a migrant laborer, you can really only afford to take public transportation. Getting from one side of Beijing to the other with public transportation takes 9 hours. So her mother would work in this factory and sleep on the factory floor and come home only 2 days every 2 months. So Huyan and her brother took care of themselves. So they went to school and They were very well adjusted, really good kids. But she found a job and she found a place for her kids to have an education. That's what was important. And I can't emphasize enough that the priorities that people I meet out in the field, the priorities they have are inspiring. The work that I do, I think, is very inspiring. So my approach here was, Huyan is all alone. She's sort of out there alone. And what I did was, I had the principal of the school, the liaison from the NGO, an interpreter, a writer, myself, and then there's always like 2 guys around in every country I go to. I don't know what they do, but there's always like 2 guys that are just going around with the photographer. So there's about 7 of us in this little room. And what I did was I just took the camera to my face, and I always hold that camera to my face for a long time. And I just sort of study what's going on. At that point, it's about what's happening in the frame, And I decided to make that wall clear, so it sort of isolates her, lets her seem isolated. And then I waited for her to bring the bowl up to her face so it would illuminate her face a little, and then I made the exposure. So I spent about 4 hours on this story, maybe 5. And Mercy Corps did this, who was the client, did this little, it's about the size of a New York Times magazine. It's like sort of a printed piece on China, and then another thing on Indonesia. And this is how they used it. And it's important to know, I thought this would be important for you guys to know how NGOs use this sort of work. So this is a chalkboard in China, and I photographed that as a detail. So I just photographed her cooking dinner or lunch, her with her brother in the background, all the kids lined up at school, and her in school and things like that. And then on the last page is the mailing part, and then one photograph that when you work for NGOs that's nice to have is sort of like a place setter. And you can't really see it probably, but there's a little Origami Birds up on the table, and kind of like a little school setting type thing. So this is a trip to Mongolia. This is like 10 years ago. These guys herd camels on motorcycles in the ice. If I wasn't a photographer, it'd be pretty cool to ride around the Gobi chasing down camels.
This is all still film.
This is all still film, yeah, and this was cold. It was cold. I mean, it was so cold that this cow froze and tipped over. This is a view from my hotel room in Ulaanbaatar. So this is the capital of Mongolia. And if you notice down in the lower third, kind of halfway in there, you see that little circle, that yurt? That's what Mongolians live in. And the Soviets had helped out Mongolia a lot and built all these apartment buildings. But the Mongolians are used to living in yurts with, round rooms. So it's interesting because there's a lot of yurts interspersed with the regular architecture. And they would prefer to live in a room that's round. And, I always put myself in the place of who I'm photographing. And I always wondered what it would be like if somebody all of a sudden said, I had to live in a room that was round, because I'm used to a room with corners. It's interesting that, we don't really take into account, what people are going through. This is a picture of a yurt during an electrical storm. This was on a tripod, and I just stopped down the camera and put it on bulb, and when the light was flashing. And it was on a tripod, so I stood away from the camera because it's a lightning rod. But people were coming and going from that little doorway. Can everybody see these okay up here? Is this, yeah, oh, good. This is inside a yurt. This is probably an 8-second exposure handheld. I had my shoulders on my knees when I was squatting down. It's during a full moon.
8 seconds?
8 seconds.
You're able to hold still enough that there's no blur?
Well, there's blur, but I don't care. I think sharpness is a little overrated. I really do. I think how many megapixels there are and how sharp something is, it's kind of, who cares? We talked about this, Soviet art in Azerbaijan. This is a woman with tuberculosis, which is, I think it's the leading cause, it definitely was the leading cause of unnatural death in the world. And it's highly treatable. And I was in this is in a town called Sumgayat, which is always on the top 10 most polluted lists. It's always like number 3 or number 4, after like Chernobyl stuff. And there's no electricity there, so we went through this hallway with this candle, and somebody put the candle down on the chair, and I photographed the woman with TB, and she was being treated for it. This is in Nakhchivan, which is an autonomous region of Azerbaijan, and this is me just squatting down and photographing, and I shot probably 10 rolls of film, 360 pictures, to get all 3 of those people in their own little space. And I look at it now and I'm kind of like, I think it's a little too contrived almost. So when I have some time, I'll never do it, but go back and see if there's some other photographs from that I could use. Any questions? You guys are great. These are people that live in previously abandoned boxcars, decommissioned boxcars, these trains. And in the winter, they're like a freezer. They're just so cold. And in the summer, they're like an oven. So most of what happens in between the boxcars. And this is a girl cooking some bread there. This is a shepherd, a little boy. He's 16, who's herding some sheep. This is in Azerbaijan. This is all Azerbaijan.
What time of day was it?
It was in the afternoon. It was probably like 5 in the afternoon. The sun was still pretty high, as you can see, but there was clouds, so I lucked out.
Your skies are beautiful. I love the pictures.
Is it nice? Thanks. These 2 ladies, they did a lot for this refugee community. So I had to get a photograph of them. And what I did was I had a long lens. This is when I had a 300 millimeter lens, and I had strobe equipment. So I put the lens on a tripod, and I'm sort of setting them up, and then I had a guy there's always like 30 or 40 people watching me do this. So I put him to work, I said, can you hold this light or this or that? And I'll talk about crowd. Yeah, I got plenty of time. I'll talk about crowd management after we're done here. So what I do is I walk up to my subject and I sort of, just to straighten up their collar or whatever, just to sort of break down barriers. And then I go back to my camera and then I straighten it up and I go, perfect. And then I go back to my camera. And my interpreter, his name was Ramil, said, Thatcher, we got to talk. I said, well, Ramil, can it wait? He said, no, it's pretty important. I said, well, what is it? He said, when you make the OK sign with your hands, you're actually flipping them off. You're flipping them the bird. So they're there. And when you know that about the photograph, their expressions take on a whole different thing. She started standing there like, he seems like a nice guy. Yeah, he sure does, but I wish he'd just quit flipping us off. Anyways, I apologized, of course, and it was, we laughed. At least I did. I don't know. And then this is how it was used. See, the NGOs, they crop my pictures, and I let them. I mean, I just don't let them misrepresent what's going on. But, they're my clients, and they've paid for me to do a job, and I get the full picture if I want, so they can take just part of the pictures if they want, I guess. This is a hospital. This is the clinic. Most of these folks have malaria, I believe. This is the one little IV that they have. And when you're really far out, there's no hotels, so we sleep on these cots, and these foam pads, and then we put mosquito netting over us. So we were at this clinic out in the middle of nowhere, and I mean, I showed you pictures already from Niger. So this building on the right is a pretty solid structure for Niger, where most of the homes and places out in the middle of nowhere are just twig and mud. And I went to sleep, and then that morning I was awakened by this woman, and she was speaking French because Niger used to be a French colony, and I don't speak French, but Roger, the writer, spoke French and said that she was a midwife, and a woman had come in to deliver a baby the night before, and this baby was delivered. But the woman was having twins, and they couldn't induce labor for the second twin, and could we offer some money for the ambulance to get some gas to go to the next town and get medical treatment there. So we just gave money and got them some gas, and we heard the ambulance, and the car took off. So then Roger and I went from village to village that day, and we worked our way down to where that ambulance went off to, and they were waiting for us there, and they were saying, they don't have what they need here, could we have money to go to Niamey? And by now, it was 12 hours later. Niamey is the capital city. So we were, of course, we'll give you some money to take care of this. But then what happened was the husband got involved and started asking for a lot of money, several $100s beyond what was originally asked for, that we didn't have. And he wasn't really letting us just get the wife to the hospital. So through a whole process, we got the director of the hospital to come. We gave him the money. He gave the ambulance driver the money. The ambulance driver bought the fuel, and then they went off. And unfortunately, this baby now is an orphan. The mother and the unborn child passed away.
How did you deal with the fact that you were surrounded by a lot of medical conditions?
How do I deal with being surrounded by a lot of medical conditions?
Protecting yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I get sick all the time. I had a assignment in Ethiopia a couple years ago, and we were photographing and interviewing this program where the NGO is having the local hospital stop prophylactically cutting out tonsils to prevent tonsillitis, but a lot of people were dying. Infants were dying from having their tonsils cut out. So they were just saying, don't cut out tonsils, was one of the things. And I was thinking, well, I'm really glad I don't have tonsillitis in Ethiopia. And sure enough, I did. I did have tonsillitis, and I had this cough, and it wouldn't go away, and they gave me, antibiotics. But I thought I was naive. I thought I'd have to get my tonsils taken out. But I always get stomach trouble, and just stomach trouble, scrapes, things like that, all the time. Yep. What was your question?
Yeah, I had a question. How often does the client's your commitment to the client's project outweigh your concerns for the human subjects you're involved in photographing?
The question was, how often do the needs of my client outweigh the needs of helping the subject? They don't outweigh it, and any NGO that would ask me to take precedence over it would be totally going against their mandate. So they wouldn't. I'm not a photojournalist, so I don't have to get the news stories. I don't have to push anybody to do anything. I never take a photograph of anybody in a situation I wouldn't want to be photographed in myself. I just help. I just help, and that's what I'm trying to do. And Mercy Corps used this as a way This is a printed piece from something they did, and they used it as a way of illustrating the medical problem in Niger and the dire part of it. Yeah, there's no question about that. And I appreciate you asking the question. Thank you. This is Uganda. And in the north, there's a war going on between Joseph Kony and his child soldiers and the general population. So this is an IDP camp. These are all huts. What happened was people used to live in the countryside, and then they've created these little refugee camps. And what they do is they have all this land on the outside of the cities that can be secured by the Ugandan government, the Ugandan military. So what happens is the folks walk into the cities and sleep in the cities at night, so they're not terrorized. Joseph Kony has these child soldiers that sort of kidnap people and make them into child soldiers or wives. And then these are some of the people who sleep on the ground, waking up. To be an NGO photographer, to do anything in this world for a career, you really just got to think about what you're wired for, what you're wired for. A lot of times, people in workshops, they love the experience of the workshop, and they say, "I had my experience. I don't want to do that. I just don't want to be stuck in the mud with an upset stomach, cold, and that sort of thing." A really good example that I give is my father. He every fall he's excited that we go duck hunting, So he polishes his gun, and we get all ready to go duck hunting. And he's up pacing all night, all excited, and it's like a father-son thing. And when we go out and he gets a duck, he's just devastated. He's just like, "What have I done?" And basically what it is he's in love with the idea of duck hunting, but not actually duck hunting. And a lot of times what we do, I think human nature is, we fall in love with the idea of something and not the actual doing it. And I'm really fortunate that I found something that I actually love doing. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, and I think that's just good advice for, the bigger picture. Yeah.
Do you try to get people in a candid way, or do you ask them to pose?
Do I get people in a candid way, or do I ask them to pose? And it's 2:30, so I think we'll finish up with Uganda, and then I'll start talking about approaching people. All right. And I saw a question over here.
I just wanted to ask you, how do you survive on this kind of work? Really.
Well, I'm very wealthy. I make tons of money. No.
You have to pay your rent. Where do you live?
Yeah. Well, I'm on the road 9 months out of the year. So 9 months out of the year, I'm writing off what I do. I teach workshops. I don't have a desire for a lot.
medical insurance,
Yeah, no, I cover myself. I have medical insurance. I have my equipment's insured. I'm wired for it. And I'll give you an example. My girlfriend, my fiance, who just waved, but she left, is a photographer. And she owns a house in Charleston, South Carolina. And I own a little cabin in New Hampshire. Well, I'm about to, I've had it since October. So I was driving my old car starting on Saturday up to New Hampshire, and then I was going to come down here to be with you. And my car broke down on Saturday in Richmond, Virginia. And I don't have any money to really fix it. And the car gets towed to a place that can't fix it, and I got to stay in a hotel in a parking lot of a mall, And I was totally in my element. I was like, all right, I got to solve this problem. And I thought about whether or not I wanted that car. I thought about what I really wanted out of a car. I thought about how much it would cost to rent a car. I thought about everything, and I went to Craigslist and I bought a cheap car, and I junked the other car, and use that to pay for the car that I bought. You know? And that's how I survive. I just do whatever I can. And I really, and I think we all do, you know? It's just a matter of what sort of awareness we have about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're a situation problem solver.
Yeah, you know, it's like, well, I could get all upset and, you know, get all pissed off at ASIS or sob or what, you know, or I could just solve the problem. You know what I mean? So, and that's how I live. You know, that's how I live. And I live a lot better than, well, I was going to say I live a lot better than the people I photograph, but I will tell you that the people I photograph, I often have a lot of jealousy, in a good way, admiration, I should say. You know, they're there. You know, your family is there. You know, and I tell people I photograph, if I'm staying with a family, I say, well, I have a sister that lives here, and a mother that lives there, and a father that lives there. And, you know, more often than not, they say, that's too bad. I'm sorry that you can't be with your family, you know? And they just spend, you know, they hang out and joke and have fun and enjoy each other's company. And don't ask that question, you know, what's in it for me? That sort of thing. So a lot of it's really inspiring. And there we go. So why don't I finish up with Uganda, and then we'll talk about approaching people, how to photograph people. Does that sound good? This guy's name is John. What happened was John was kidnapped by the LRA. They cut off his nose, his upper lip, his fingers, and his ears, and left him to die. And John, this was for an organization called the International Rescue Committee, IRC, which is based here in New York. And they asked me to photograph him in silhouette. And he started his own little business. He's got his own little kiosk at the market. And he's inspiring. You know, he's forgiven the people who's done this to him, and he's moved on. And you know, this guy's great. You know, he's a lesson in life. I mean, he wanted to be photographed with his brother, because his brother looks like him if he hadn't been cut up. So this is a photograph I'm sharing with you.
What age did he have that?
That's a good question. The question was, at what age did this happen? I think it was probably around 12 or 13. Here he's 18. This is a hotel in northern Uganda, and this is the pool at the hotel that I would not swim in, but on Sundays they do baptisms there, so I photographed the baptisms. This hotel, it's funny, I always stay at this hotel. It's in Kitgum. One time, the very first time I was staying there, like the second or third day in, I was coming into the hotel, and the manager came up to me and said, "Mr. Cook, Thatcher, there's been a terrible accident, you know." And I didn't know how he knew my name. I was just devastated. And he said that he had mixed the reds with the whites in the laundry, and all my white clothes were pink. And on the line behind him were all these pink shirts of mine. I said, "That's okay. Don't worry about it. It's totally fine. It's okay." He's like, "Well, I'm really sorry." Oh, my heart sank. This is HIV/AIDS in Uganda. This I talked about. This is that cassava factory. This is really interesting. These are all IDPs, refugees, that have built structures out of wood to create a refugee camp. They're just waiting for the plastic sheeting to put over the wood. This man and his grandchild were, I photographed them in front of their little home. And I shot the film at the wrong exposure. So I had to pole process it, which made it all blue. And I was going to just throw the roll out. And then it ended up being the cover of the annual report for IRC. This is razor wire that's on the fences, on the walls, with the different compounds that you stay in. This is This is like a place for women, young girls who have been kidnapped and forced into sexual slavery. This is where they've been able to escape and live. They're not allowed to go back to their village because they'll be in danger there, but they stay here and recuperate from the experience. And this is Eritrea, but we'll talk about approaching people. Right there. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Does anybody? Oh, thank you very much. And yeah, and if we can get back to it, we'll get back to it in terms of the slideshow. But most of you want to know how to approach people, right? Oh, also, this is a little field guide I wrote for workshops, where it tells you a lot of information about approaching people and building rapport with your subject, how to choose what your subject is. And you guys can buy them from me if you want. They're $20. What's that? Yeah. Yep, I brought some and they're $20. And then I had a book that came out called Black Apple, and it's a $50 book, but I'll let you have it for $40 if you want it. And it's on Kyrgyzstan. But look at it first, because it's unlike the work you saw up there. It's black and white and dark. So the first thing is you got to have your camera with you. So I take my camera wherever I go. And what I do is I say, hello, my name is Thatcher. What's your name? Sandy. Hi, I'm Thatcher. What's your name?
I'm Stan.
Stan. So Sandy and Stan, what I did was I shook their hand, I looked them in the eye, I had the camera around my neck, and I said, hi, what's your name? My name's Thatcher, nice to meet you. I'm from the IRC, I'm here to take some pictures. I'm honest. And I just let them see the camera, and I say, how you doing? And I say their name back in my head when she said Sandy, right? I said Sandy. And Stanley, who's my grandfather's name, so I was like, grandfather Stanley, yeah. So, and I try to remember people's names, so I can do that. And then I say, would it be all right if I made a photograph of you? All right? Now, you can answer however you want. How would you answer that, Sandy? Yeah?
I'd rather not.
I'd rather not, she said. My response is, sure. No problem. Thank you very much. And I walk on. Couple things happen here. One is, I don't want to get a photograph of somebody who doesn't want to have their picture taken, right? The second is, if I walk on, I'll walk away, and 6 times out of 10, she'll say, well, wait, why do you want to take my photograph? And I say, well, I saw you sitting here in front of your hut in Uganda, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity for a photo. I'm honest. I just say why, And then she can either say yes or no. But I've given her the illusion that she's in control of this whole conversation. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, as Americans, what happens a lot of times, we think that this is really invasive. All I did was ask if I could take somebody's photograph. Wasn't a big deal. So what we often do is we say, would it be all right if I took your picture? We don't look them in the eye, and we just sort of kind of shyly ask for this huge favor, and we give them a lot more opportunity to say no. And I didn't want to give Sandy as much opportunity to say no, but I wanted her to also feel comfortable. I wasn't bullying her at all. Does that make sense? Yep. So I just ask people, and if they say no, I don't take it personally. That whole adage about if you're an actor on stage and you forget your line, you just move on, you don't dwell on it, So
now you can take mine.
So now I can take Sandy's picture. And when somebody gives me permission, I run with it. So what I do, before I take your picture, I'm gonna give another little technique. So there's Sandy and Stanley. I asked Sandy if I could take her picture, but I really don't want Sandy's picture. I have no use for Sandy's picture. I want Stanley's picture. But I kind of sensed that Stanley might be a little shy. So what I would do is I would ask Sandy, photograph Sandy, let Stanley let Stanley see the experience of Sandy being photographed. And then say, hey, how about some photographs of you too, Stanley, you know? And then, so then we're all like working together as a team. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, and that, all I'm doing is I'm telling you how I deal with the world. And I think that whatever sort of photography you pursue, you gotta ask yourself how you deal with the world, how you deal with people, and how to maximize that. All I do is I'm honest, straightforward, non-threatening, and totally cool with whatever you say.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
the reason you're taking these are for NGOs.
Yes.
We just were at a session yesterday about legalities.
Yep.
And is that considered a commercial purpose? And do you need
Is the NGO
NGOs?
thing considered commercial? I don't get model releases. None of my clients ask for model releases unless it's in the US, because there's more lawyers in the US. So it's for an NGO, and you were benefited from it. It's not commercial, no. I think when you say commercial, you mean like advertising. Yeah, and it's not advertising. But
I mean, it's advertising.
But in
for
a
the
way,
NGO to
it
get
is.
money.
well, it's a gray area. It's listen, I don't, you know, I'm not going. I mean, we could talk for a long time on this and not have any resolution, which I've gone down that road, and I don't mind going down it again. But in theory, it's only advertising if it's on the cover, because that's what people do. And you're not advertising a product. What you're doing is you're saying that this person benefited from $500 for their farm that they paid back, and it's a story. And you can either buy into that story and say, I want to send, you know, XYZ NGO $5 so that that can go towards buying somebody a bakery or something like that. You know, there's a lot going on here. I mean, it would be really hard for somebody to sue an NGO who's doing good for being exploited. You know, there's a lot going on, you know. The photographs are never misrepresented. You know, the facts are there, and they're made very clear. Does that sort of, yeah, another question?
Yeah, I have a question about, obviously you don't ask for every single picture because, as you said, you know, you're
right now we're
standing
just
there,
getting through,
you're watching
yep.
the people go by and you snap the picture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What do you do if somebody says, hey, I don't want that picture?
Okay, we're going to talk about, the question was, this was a situation where you're asking somebody to take their photograph. We're going to go through the whole thing, okay? Right now, we've decided we don't want a picture of Sandy, but we're like flattering her by, you know, taking some pictures, and I really wanted a picture of Stanley, and so I got in there, I got any of the photographs of Stanley, because Stanley is just so much more interesting than Sandy, and all that. So, so what I'm doing is I'm photographing. Now, while I'm photographing, okay, few things. One is, we feel, and this will answer your question, we often feel like as photographers we have to entertain our subjects, you know, because Stanley's sitting there and allowing me to make a photograph of him, so I feel like I have to sort of entertain him by the act of making a photograph of him. Does that make sense? So what I do is I don't entertain. What I do is I just hold the camera up to my face and I talk my way through it, you know, either in my head or out loud, and I say, okay, you know, this is, and he'll stand there and look at the camera, and I won't say anything to him, you know, and at first it seems sort of rude, but it's not. I mean, your subject starts to realize, oh, he's working now, he's in the mode, and he's sort of, it's about what's going on in the frame and everything. And no matter how much spare time you have, no matter how destitute you are, some guy with a camera is only interesting for about 15, 20 minutes at the most, but usually 5 to 10 minutes. They'll start to go back to what they were doing before you got there. And then they'll start hearing the shutter go, and they'll be like, oh, he likes what I'm doing. And then they'll start to smile, and then the shutter will kind of, because you have people like shoveling manure or washing dishes with a big smile. It doesn't look very natural. So what I do is I let them kind of fall back into what they were doing, and then I make photographs that way. Does that make sense for everyone? So that's a scenario where I've gone to a location predetermined by an NGO. I've listened to how I interact with the world, and I've decided that I want a picture of Stanley, and I'm going about it, and that's how I do it. So that's how I do that. Okay. I don't pay for photographs because I want them to want to have their photograph made because they want to have their photograph made, not as a means of making a profit. Because that starts to feel like you're exploiting them. Now, what I do is when I was in Ribnova in Bulgaria, and I stayed with that family for 2 or 3 weeks, ate their food, slept in their spare room and all that, I really felt like they should be compensated, especially since I sort of fell in love with the whole family and I just want to do something really nice for them. So what I do when I stay with a family is I usually make a very generous offer to the family, and I say, here's some money to take care of what was going on. And that's what I used to do. It's kind of back and forth. I sort of read the family. You put it in an envelope and seal it and say, open this later. Another thing I'll do, if you don't want to have that conversation where, if you're giving somebody $200 or $300 and it's, 2 months salary for them, the stakes are really high for them. And for them to have to say, no, it's really tough, and you don't want to put them in that position. So what I generally do is I'll leave money under a pillow, and I'll in an envelope or something, and I'll say goodbye to everybody and hug them, and then say check under the pillow, and so I'm already gone, and they get it, and I make sure that they understand it's because I spent 3 weeks with them, or 2 weeks with them, or 4 days with them, or something like that. And it's just to help them out, to compensate them for what I've cost them. Plus it's just nice to help people out. Yep.
So, that's interesting because are the lodging arrangements made by the NGO or?
The question is, are lodging arrangements made by the NGO?
And I would think that if so, and whether it's the NGO or you doing it, that's sort of up front. You're staying with someone for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
They're feeding you.
Well,
there would be an agreement going in.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different ways it works. If there's a workshop and people are staying with families, it's predetermined the family will get paid X amount of dollars for hosting a student. And they cook and feed them and stuff like that. NGOs have a lot of they have a lot of field offices, so they'll have like a little compound that they can travel to different places, and you just stay there a lot of times. Sometimes when you're really far out, you stay with families. I like to stay with families. I like to wake up in the environment I'm photographing in. So I always try to arrange a few homestays on every assignment. I usually get like one or two nights. And the reason I gave the example of 2 or 3 weeks is because I was referring back to Ribnova in Bulgaria, where that's what I did. Does that answer your question? So if you're staying with a family and they get into the mode where you put that camera up to your face, and I don't take the camera away from my face, even after it gets weird. If they ask you a question, I usually say, yep, that's cool, thank you, yeah, and just really quick little answers. And then when the camera's away from my face, and the light's not good, or the people aren't doing anything that I feel important, then we hang out and joke and we have fun. You know what I mean? And that's great. That's really great, and it's really enriching. And I try to make the whole experience of people being photographed enriching. It's kind of nice to think that some of the people I photograph, when at the end of the day, at dinner, they sort of say, well, this guy came and photographed me today. It's kind of interesting, and make their day a little bit more interesting. So that's that. The other technique I have, and I love street photography, and what I do is I'll find like a facade of something, and then I'll pull back, and then maybe a flag will be coming in the top, or a tree or a bush will come in the bottom, or something like that, or there's a dog laying down. And I'll sort of frame up the picture and wait for somebody to walk through my frame. And then I go click, click, click. And I mean, I've been doing this since I was 12. So 364 days from now, I will have been doing it 30 years. And so I'm pretty good at it. I mean, I'm pretty good, sorry about the light. I can photograph Sandy, from 2 or 3 feet away without her even really knowing or caring. And it's sort of, sometimes you just click, and I don't make eye contact with who I'm photographing, because that sort of slows the whole process down. And then I'll go click, 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 click. And it's sort of like building up to the image, so you just go in, and then you get it. Does that make sense?
And do you do that in the U.S.?
Mm-hmm. The question was, do I do that in the U.S.? I do it everywhere.
And do you find the attitudes different here? That people...
Do I find the attitudes in the U.S. different? Yes. The U.S., it's not more difficult, it's just different. A lot of it's because I'm an American, so it's not, so if I'm in another country, I can always use the excuse, which is truthful, that we don't do it that way in my country. It's really interesting. I'd like to have a photograph of how you wash dishes, In the U.S., I just sort of approach it the same way. May I make a photograph of you? Yes or no, and then take it from there. Yeah, but every situation is different, and you gotta like pay attention to how you relate to the world. You really have to love it. Yep.
So you never had problems standing on a bus stop somewhere taking pictures, and somebody came and said, like, go away with it?
Oh, the question was, do I ever have anybody shoo me away at a bus stop? For example. Yeah, but you know what? A lot of times the people who shoo me away aren't the people I'm photographing. I'll sort of just see somebody and I kind of smile and then start taking a picture, and they either say yes or no. And then somebody will come out from the left or the right and say, hey, what are you doing? Taking pictures. And it's sort of like, you had nothing to do with this experience, Who are you, But I say, I was just making photographs, I'm just honest, and if they don't like it, that's something they're going to have to live with. But I think that they're probably angry about something else that I had nothing to do with. And I think that's about it, everybody. Thank you very much.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.